There is a certain sound that should never echo across a peaceful ranch at sunrise, the crack of a gunshot. I heard it before I even opened my eyes, and in that half-second of waking confusion, 1,000 possibilities crashed through my mind. Was someone poaching? Was one of my neighbors in trouble? Was my prize bull Titan in danger? I sprang out of bed, still tangled in my sheets, and sprinted to the window, my heart punching my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. What I saw out there on my land made me curse loud enough to wake the dead. A group of men, strangers in camo gear, rifles slung over their shoulders, marching straight across my fields like they owned the place. 2 days earlier, if you had asked me to name the one person who could stir up trouble faster than a twister through a chicken coop, I would have said it without thinking: Karen. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the local HOA, a woman who treated neighborhood bylaws like her personal Bible and acted like she had been ordained by some higher power to enforce them. The problem was, my ranch did not fall under the HOA's jurisdiction. Never had. Never would. That never stopped Karen, though. She called my ranch an eyesore. She called my animals a health hazard. She complained about the smell, the noise, the look of the barns, even the way the grass grew. To hear her talk, you would think I was running a toxic waste dump instead of a family ranch that had been in my family for 3 generations. Titan was my pride. A massive, glossy black bull with the temperament of a wise old king. He had won ribbons and trophies all across the county fairs and livestock shows. More than that, Titan was family. Every morning he would come to the fence when he saw me, snorting softly, waiting for his head rub and a scratch behind the ears. It was our ritual, our quiet understanding. I had raised him from a calf, and there was nothing in the world that could replace him. The day before the gunshots, I had noticed something strange: tire tracks across the muddy field near the south fence. They were not mine, and they were not from any neighbor I recognized. I asked Joe, my next-door neighbor and drinking buddy, if he had seen anything odd. Joe just chuckled and said he heard Karen bragging in the HOA meeting that she would find a way to clean up the ranch problem once and for all. I had brushed it off at the time. Karen made empty threats all the time. Now, standing there in my boxers at the window, watching camo-clad strangers tramp across my land, I knew I should have taken Joe more seriously. I yanked on a pair of jeans and boots so fast I nearly fell down the stairs. I grabbed my phone and my shotgun, not because I wanted a fight, but because a man has a right to defend his property, and tore out the door yelling the whole way. "Hey, you are trespassing!" I shouted as I ran, my boots thudding against the dirt. The men looked up casually, no fear, no guilt, like they belonged there. One of them even grinned and tipped his cap. "Relax, buddy," he said, "we got permission." Permission. My blood boiled hotter than a branding iron. From who? I barked. The man shrugged. "The HOA lady. Karen. She said we could hunt on this patch. Said the owner was fine with it." I thought I was going to blow a gasket. First off, Karen had no authority. Second, even if she had, nobody had the right to authorize strangers with guns to roam my land. I pointed to the fence line. "You see that wire, that fence, that no trespassing sign in big red letters? That is your first clue you are not supposed to be here." One of them, a heavy-set guy with a scraggly beard, looked sheepish. Another, a tall guy with mirrored sunglasses, looked bored. Then he casually turned and lifted his rifle. And that is when I saw it. Titan standing at the edge of the field, head high, his glossy coat gleaming in the morning sun, curious as ever about the strangers. No, I screamed, but it was too late. The tall guy squeezed the trigger and a sharp crack echoed across the field. Titan staggered back, his massive body swaying like a falling tree. I dropped my shotgun and ran, faster than I had ever moved in my life. When I reached him, Titan was on his side, gasping, blood pooling under his massive frame. I dropped to my knees in the mud beside him, tears blurring my vision. "You stupid sons of," I choked, unable to even finish the sentence. My hands pressed against the wound, useless against the sheer damage. One of the hunters mumbled something about a clean kill being legal during hunting season. I turned on him so fast he stumbled backward. There is no hunting season here, you idiot. This is private land. This is my bull, my Titan. You just shot him on my property. I was shaking with rage and heartbreak. Every second felt like a lifetime. I yanked my phone from my pocket and called the vet. Then I called the sheriff. My fingers were clumsy and wet with Titan's blood, but I managed to get the words out. I need help. Now. The hunters started looking nervous. The fat one wanted to leave. The tall one stood his ground for a moment, but even he knew the situation was spiraling out of control. I did not care if they ran or stayed. They were not going to get away with this. Not after what they had done. As the sirens started wailing in the distance, Karen herself drove up in her gleaming white SUV, looking smug and victorious. She stepped out, sunglasses perched on her nose, holding a clipboard like she was conducting an inspection. I wanted to throttle her. "What is all this noise about?" she said loudly, her voice dripping fake concern. "You did this," I said, my voice low and deadly. "You are going to pay for this, Karen. I swear on everything I love." Titan moaned low and pained behind me. I pressed my hand gently against his massive head and whispered a promise into his ear. "Hang on, buddy. Just hang on. We are going to make this right." And deep down, I knew that whatever it took, whatever the cost, I was going to destroy Karen so thoroughly that she would regret ever stepping foot onto my land. The sound of sirens grew louder, a shrill promise that backup was on its way, but every second dragged out like an eternity as I knelt beside Titan. His breathing was labored and his body trembled against the dirt, a heartbreaking sight that burned itself into my memory. I kept murmuring to him, kept my hand steady on his massive shoulder, willing him to hold on just a little longer. When the first sheriff's cruiser skidded into the driveway, dust billowing up in angry clouds, I finally stood up, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. The deputy who stepped out, a young guy named Miller, looked around and immediately understood that this was no ordinary call. His hand hovered near his belt, ready for trouble. I pointed at the hunters, who had bunched together awkwardly near the fence. "There they are," I snapped, "trespassing, illegal hunting, and shooting my prize bull." Miller approached them cautiously and started asking questions. The hunters fell over themselves trying to explain, their words stumbling into each other. The fat one insisted they had permission from the HOA president. The tall one with the sunglasses kept quiet, arms folded, trying to look tough but failing under the weight of the situation. Karen, meanwhile, sauntered over with her clipboard clutched tight to her chest like a shield. "Officer," she said in a syrupy sweet tone, "these fine gentlemen were simply enjoying a lawful hunting trip. It is all perfectly authorized." I raised my voice over hers. "Authorized by who?" I demanded. "You have no authority here, Karen. This is my ranch, my land." She shot me a look that could have curdled milk. I could see it in her eyes. She really thought she had one. That somehow, her made-up rules and fake titles gave her the power to give strangers permission to violate my home. Miller turned to me. "Sir, do you have proof that this property is outside the HOA jurisdiction?" I almost laughed. "Of course I do." I pulled my phone from my back pocket and showed him the property maps, official county records I had saved years ago for just this kind of nonsense. Miller studied them carefully and nodded. Karen started to protest, but Miller cut her off. "Ma'am, unless you can show me a deed or some other legal authority that grants you control over this property, you are interfering with a private landowner's rights. That is a serious offense." Karen's face turned a fascinating shade of red, somewhere between a ripe tomato and a fire truck. She spluttered about community rights and neighborhood standards, but Miller ignored her and focused on the hunters. One of the men, the heavy-set one, tried to present a crumpled piece of paper. It was a so-called permit complete with a fake-looking HOA stamp and a sloppy signature. Miller examined it with the kind of frown that said he smelled a pile of something foul. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The fat man jerked a thumb toward Karen. "She gave it to us. Told us we could hunt hogs and deer to thin out the population." My blood boiled again. Hogs and deer. Karen did not even know the difference between a deer track and a cow patty. And now Titan was paying the price for her arrogance. Miller called in the sheriff himself, an old-school man named Sheriff Danvers, who did not take kindly to nonsense. When Danvers arrived, he took one look at the scene and sighed like a man who had seen one too many idiots in his day. He inspected the fake permit, listened to both sides, and rubbed his temples like he was fighting a headache the size of Texas. "Here is the thing," Danvers said slowly. "Technically, if they believed they had permission and they did not knowingly falsify documents, the hunters might skate by with a fine. Maybe a misdemeanor. Karen, on the other hand, could be facing felony charges for forging documents, trespassing, and conspiracy." Karen paled so fast I thought she might faint. That was the first good thing I had heard all morning, but it was not enough. I wanted more. I wanted justice, not just for me but for Titan, who still lay struggling in the dirt while all this legal back and forth dragged on. The vet finally arrived, screeching to a halt in his dusty old truck. Doc Harris, a wiry man with steel-gray hair and a sharp tongue, rushed to Titan's side with his medical bag clanging against his hip. He worked quickly, checking vital signs, cleaning the wound, murmuring to his assistant for supplies. "He is a fighter," Doc Harris muttered to me. "Bad hit, but not hopeless. If he makes it through the next 24 hours, he has a chance." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Whatever it takes, document. Do whatever it takes." As Titan was stabilized and loaded onto a trailer for emergency care, I turned back to the circus happening in my front yard. Karen was trying to argue her way out of it, throwing around legal terms she barely understood, threatening lawsuits and countersuit. Sheriff Danvers finally had enough. He cuffed her right there in front of everyone, reading her rights while half the neighborhood, drawn by the commotion, watched from their porches and driveways. "You cannot do this," Karen shrieked, struggling against the handcuff. "I am the HOA president. I have rights." Danvers shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The hunters were cited for trespassing and unlawful discharge of firearms on private property. Their weapons were confiscated pending investigation. They slunk away like scolded dogs, faces red, muttering apologies that fell flat. I stood there as the dust settled around me, Titan gone to the vet, Karen hauled off in the back of a squad car, and the hunters packing up under police orders. My heart was still pounding, but underneath the anger and heartbreak was a slow burning sense of resolve. This was not over. Not by a long shot. Karen had picked a fight she could not win. She had underestimated me, underestimated Titan, and underestimated the fact that country folks do not forget and they do not forgive easily when it comes to loyalty and land. I turned back toward the house, my boots heavy with mud and blood and sweat, and I made myself a vow. Karen was about to learn that there is a big difference between pushing around a homeowners association and messing with a man and his land. And when I was done with her, she would regret ever stepping foot on my ranch. The next morning the air on the ranch felt heavy, like a storm was brewing even though the skies were clear. I barely slept, my mind racing all night between anger and grief. Titan was in the animal hospital fighting for his life, and I was stuck at home staring at the wreckage left behind. Karen had been booked and processed but was already out on bail thanks to a lawyer friend of hers. I knew it was just the beginning of the war. She was not the kind to back down quietly even after being caught red-handed. No, Karen was the type to double down on her lies and drag everyone else down with her if she could. Sure enough, by mid-morning the phone calls started. Reporters from local news stations were sniffing around, asking if the rumors were true. Was it true that a rancher had attacked innocent hunters? Was it true that a rogue bull had gone wild and needed to be put down? Was it true that the HOA president had been wrongfully arrested? Karen had clearly gotten ahead of the story, spinning it like a spider, weaving a web of half-truths and full-blown lies. I kept my mouth shut with the reporters. Let Karen dig her own grave deeper. I had other plans. First I went to Joe, my neighbor, the one who had first warned me about Karen's scheming. Joe had seen the hunters on my land. More importantly, he had overheard Karen bragging at the HOA meeting just a few days before. I asked him straight up if he would be willing to testify. Joe spat into the dirt and nodded. I have had about enough of her nonsense anyhow, he said. You just say when and where. Next I checked the security footage. A while back, after a string of petty thefts around the county, I had installed trail cameras all over the property. They were hidden in fence post trees, even disguised as birdhouses. I spent hours combing through the footage until my patience paid off. There she was, clear as day, Karen in her ridiculous oversized sunglasses and floral jacket, meeting the hunters at the edge of my south field. She handed them a map, pointed at my property line, and even laughed about how she was doing everyone a favor. It was the smoking gun I needed. Armed with the footage and Joe's statement, I set up a meeting with Sheriff Danvers. He watched the videos in silence, his jaw tightening with every passing second. When the clip ended, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Well, he said, looks like you have got yourself a slam dunk. Forgery, criminal trespassing, endangerment, animal cruelty. And depending how the DA wants to play it, maybe even conspiracy. I nodded grimly, but I was not smiling. Not yet. It was not just about winning in court. It was about making sure Karen could not slither out of this with some slimy loophole or teary apology. She had humiliated me, tried to ruin my ranch, and worst of all, she had nearly killed Titan. I wanted this to be public, undeniable, and permanent. Danvers suggested I take the evidence to a civil attorney too. Criminal charges would punish her, but a civil lawsuit could hit her where it really hurt, her wallet. I agreed. The more pressure from every side, the better. Meanwhile, Karen was busy trying to salvage her reputation. She organized a community meeting at the HOA clubhouse that weekend, claiming she wanted to set the record straight. I decided to attend, not because I cared about what she had to say, but because I wanted to see how far she was willing to go. Joe came with me, and so did about a dozen other neighbors curious to see the show. Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse wearing a neat blue dress and a forced smile. She launched into a speech about community values, about misunderstanding, and about how she had only ever wanted what was best for everyone. She painted herself as the victim, wrongfully accused and unfairly targeted by bitter landowners who refused to follow the rules. Her voice wobbled just enough to sound emotional, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. She even produced a few fake letters, supposedly from other neighbors, thanking her for her leadership and asking her to help clean up the neighborhood. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the same loopy cursive she used on the fake hunting permit. She was so desperate she was forging support letters. When she opened the floor for questions, Joe spoke up first. How exactly does giving armed strangers access to someone else's land without their permission fit into community values? He asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen stammered something about mistaken identity and poor communication. Another neighbor chimed in, asking why she had told people the ranch was abandoned when everyone knew it was still active. Karen waved it off, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. That was when I stepped forward, holding up a flash drive between two fingers. I have got footage, I said calmly, that says otherwise. Full video. Audio too. If anyone wants to see the real story, I am happy to share. A ripple went through the crowd. Karen blanched visibly, her facade crumbling for a split second before she pasted the fake smile back on her face. I turned and walked out without waiting for a reply. I had made my point. The next day I filed the civil lawsuit. Damages for the cost of Titan's medical care, lost income from cancelled livestock, shows emotional distress, and punitive damages for willful malicious actions. The total amount was staggering enough to make even Karen's rich husband sweat. I heard through the grapevine that she had screamed so loud when she got served that half the block heard her. While the legal gears turned, I focused on Titan. Doc Harris called with cautious good news. Titan was stable. The wound had been cleaned and stitched, and he was responding to treatment. It would be a long recovery, but the big guy was a fighter. I visited him every day, bringing him treats and talking to him about the weather, the ranch, anything to keep his spirits up. His dark eyes followed me with a tired but determined glint. He was not giving up, and neither was I. At night, when the house was quiet and the fields stretched out dark and endless under the stars, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and thought about everything that had happened. Karen had thought she could bully and manipulate her way through life without consequences. She had thought a few lies and a fake title made her invincible. She had forgotten one simple truth: when you mess with a man's home, a man's animals, you are not just picking a fight, you are declaring war. And I was just getting started. The first real sign that things were starting to turn in my favor came a week after Titan's injury. I pulled up to the animal hospital and found him standing on all four legs inside the recovery pen, his head high, those proud dark eyes locked onto me the moment he saw my truck. I could not even pretend to hold back the grin that stretched across my face. I hopped out and hurried over, reaching through the rails to scratch behind his ears the way he loved. Titan snorted softly and leaned into my hand with a rumbling sound that was as close to a purr as a 2,000-pound bull could manage. Doc Harris appeared behind me, wiping his hands on a rag, and nodded with satisfaction. "He has got the heart of a champion," he said quietly. "Another few weeks and he will be back to his old self. Just take it slow." That news alone would have been enough to lift my spirits, but it was only the beginning. Word had spread fast through the community about what Karen had done and about the evidence piling up against her. Neighbors who had once been too scared or too polite to stand up to her were now showing up at my door, offering statements, stories, and in a few cases apologies for not speaking out sooner. I kept track of everything, building a mountain of evidence that would leave no room for her to wiggle out. Joe helped me organize a town meeting at the local Grange Hall, a neutral ground where the HOA had no authority and where Karen could not control the narrative. We put out flyers, made a few calls, and before long it was clear we were going to have a full house. I knew Karen would hear about it, and I knew she would try to crash the party. That was exactly what I wanted. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early, setting up a projector and making sure the video clips from my hidden cameras were ready to roll. Joe was there too, along with several other neighbors who had grown tired of Karen's reign of petty terror. By the time the meeting started, there were more than 100 people packed into the hall, standing room only, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Karen showed up fashionably late, wearing a bright red jacket and a scowl that could have soured milk. She strutted in like she still thought she had the upper hand, waving at a few folks and flashing a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. I watched her from the front of the room, waiting until she settled into a chair right up front where she would have no choice but to see everything. I kept the introduction short and sweet. "Thank you all for coming," I said, keeping my voice steady. "There has been a lot of talk lately, a lot of rumors. Tonight I am going to show you the truth." With that, I dimmed the lights and hit play. The footage rolled across the screen, grainy but clear enough to recognize faces and voices. There was Karen handing the hunters a map of my ranch. There was her laughing and telling them not to worry about the owner because he never really paid attention. There was her pointing out access points and advising them on the best times to enter undetected. The room went dead silent except for the occasional gasp or whispered curse. When the video ended, I turned the lights back on and faced the crowd. "This is not about HOA rules or property lines," I said. "This is about respect, about safety, about the law. What happened to Titan could have happened to a child, a family member, anyone. All because one person decided her opinion mattered more than everyone else's right." Karen was beet red and trembling with fury. She shot up from her chair and started shouting about doctored videos and character assassination, but no one was buying it anymore. People started booing her, jeering her, until she finally stormed out of the hall, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I let the crowd simmer down before wrapping up. I encouraged everyone to stay involved, to keep pushing back against abuse of power, and to remember that communities were supposed to support each other, not tear each other down. The applause that followed was not polite or half-hearted. It was real and thunderous, and it filled the hall with hope that maybe, just maybe, things were going to get better around here. After the meeting, neighbors came up to shake my hand, pat my back, and offer more help. One woman, an elderly lady named Mrs. Simmons, handed me an old dusty file folder. "I found these in my attic," she said with a sly smile. "HOA meeting minutes from the last 5 years. Might find them useful." I thanked her warmly, already thinking of ways I could use that information if Karen tried to pull any more trick. Meanwhile, the civil lawsuit against Karen was moving forward at full speed. My lawyer was a no-nonsense type, who had taken one look at the evidence and grinned like a wolf spotting an injured rabbit. We filed motions, demanded depositions, and subpoenaed record. Every move we made tightened the noose around Karen's neck a little more. Karen's attorney tried every trick in the book to delay proceedings, but nothing worked. The judge assigned to the case was known for hating nonsense, and he was not amused by Karen's antics. When her lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in the best interests of the community, the judge raised an eyebrow and said best interests do not include trespassing, forgery, or putting lives in danger. Motion denied. With every passing day, Karen's support base crumbled. Board members resigned. Neighbors who had once been her loyal lapdogs crossed the street to avoid being seen with her. Even her own family started to distance themselves. I heard through the grapevine that her husband was furious about the legal bills piling up and the steady collapse of their social standing. But I was not done yet. Not by a long shot. I had one final card to play away to make sure that even if Karen somehow wriggled out of the legal consequences, she would never regain the power she once wielded. I started organizing a community improvement project, something Karen had promised for years but never delivered on. Together with my neighbors, we cleaned up the park, fixed the broken swings, repaired the cracked sidewalks, and planted a community garden. All without HOA interference. All without Karen. And when the news crews showed up to cover the story, I made sure they got a full tour of the improvements and plenty of interviews with smiling, happy residents who were more than happy to talk about how good things were now that certain people had been removed from positions of power. It was not revenge. It was restoration. It was taking back our community from fear and control and giving it back to the people who truly cared about it. And it was only the beginning. The courthouse parking lot was already full when I pulled in the morning of Karen's hearing. Trucks, sedans, even a news van or two were crammed into every available space. I climbed out of my old pickup, feeling a weight settle over me. This was it. Months of gathering evidence, community meetings, Titan's slow recovery, it all led to today. I adjusted my hat, took a steadying breath, and headed toward the front doors where people were milling around in small groups, whispering and pointing. Inside the courtroom the tension was thick enough to choke on. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her hair perfect, her makeup laid on thick, but there was no hiding the tightness in her face or the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. Her lawyer, a sharp-faced man with expensive shoes, whispered furiously in her ear while she nodded like a bobblehead. Across the aisle my lawyer sat calm and composed, flipping through a thick folder of evidence we had compiled. When he caught my eye he gave a slight nod that said, "We have got her." The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, entered and called the room to order. The first half hour was a parade of evidence. The fake hunting permit with Karen's handwriting. The footage from my hidden cameras showing her giving hunters access to my land. The vet bills for Titan's care. Statements from neighbors. HOA meeting minutes Mrs. Simmons had handed over showing Karen's long history of bending and breaking rules whenever it suited her. Every piece stacked higher and higher until even Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Karen tried to object. She stood up at one point, interrupting the judge mid-sentence with a breathless, "Your Honor, this is all a big misunderstanding. I was only trying to help the community." The judge's gavel came down hard, silencing her. "Sit down, Mrs. Carter," she said, her voice like steel. "You will have your turn." When it was finally Karen's time to speak, her lawyer pushed her up like a reluctant puppet. Karen clutched the stand and launched into a tearful speech about her dedication to the neighborhood, about her fear of wild animals hurting children, about her deep, deep regret that anyone had been harmed. She even dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, trying to squeeze out a tear. But the judge was unmoved. "Mrs. Carter," she said after Karen's performance, "if you were truly concerned about safety, you should have contacted animal control, not handed rifles to unlicensed hunters and sent them onto private property." The judge shook her head slowly. "Your actions were reckless, endangering not just livestock but human lives." The gavel came down again. "I find the defendant guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted into a low hum of murmurs and gasps. Karen looked stunned, as if she genuinely believed she could cry her way out of this. The judge continued reading the sentence. Karen was ordered to pay a $250,000 fine for damages and legal fees. She was banned from holding any position of authority within the HOA or any similar organization for a minimum of 10 years. A restraining order was placed preventing her from coming within 200 yards of my ranch or Titan. And to top it all off, she was sentenced to 6 months of probation with mandatory community service working at the county animal shelter. The look on her face when she heard that last part was pure devastation. Karen, who once looked down her nose at everyone, would now spend her days cleaning kennels and picking up after stray dogs. It was better than any revenge I could have planned. As the courtroom cleared out, reporters crowded around me, shoving microphones into my face. I gave them the short version. I was just protecting my land and my animals. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. That is all there is to it. Karen, meanwhile, fled through a side door, shielding her face from the cameras with her fancy purse. It was not enough. Pictures of her teary red face and defeated posture were plastered across every local news site by nightfall. Karen Carter, former HOA president, found guilty in ranch trespass scandal, one headline read. "Justice for Titan," another one said, with a picture of Titan at the state fair from the year before. Back home the mood was lighter than it had been in months. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and pies, offering congratulations and relief. Kids ran through the fields laughing. Titan even managed a slow, proud walk around the pasture, his wound healing more each day. The ranch felt alive again, the way it was meant to be. In the weeks that followed, Karen put her house on the market. Rumor had it she was moving out of state, trying to escape the mess she had made. No one threw her a going-away party. No one wished her luck. The few people who had once defended her now pretended they had never known her. I spent my days fixing fences, repairing the barns, and planning for the future. Titan was going to be just fine. I had entered him into the upcoming county fair, not because I cared about the trophies, but because I wanted him to stand tall and proud again, where everyone could see what real strength looked like. Late one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields gold, I stood by the fence watching Titan graze. He looked up at me with those calm, steady eyes, and for the first time in a long while I felt truly at peace. We had been tested and we had come out stronger. Karen had tried to break us with lies and greed, but she had only made us tougher, more determined, more united. The ranch was not just land and fences and animals. It was a way of life built on respect, hard work, and heart. And no one, not even a woman as spiteful as Karen, could ever take that away. The morning of the county fair dawned cool and bright, with a crispness in the air that carried the scent of hay and fresh earth. I had been up before sunrise brushing Titan until his black coat gleamed like polished onyx. Every stroke of the brush was a small celebration, a reminder of everything we had fought through together. When I led him into the trailer, he walked with a steady, sure gait that made my chest swell with pride. Just a few months ago I had knelt beside him in the dirt, certain I was losing him forever, and now here, he was stronger than ever, ready to face the world again. At the fairgrounds the buzz of excitement was everywhere. Families wandered from booth to booth, kids clutched sticky cotton candy in their fists, and the air rang with the sound of laughter and the occasional bellow from a prize steer or bull. Titan was calm through it all, his massive frame drawing admiring glances and whispered comments from passers-by. Some recognized him right away, and I caught more than a few folks nudging each other and pointing. "That is the bull from the news," one man said to his wife. "That is the one that lady tried to have shot." I did not pay much attention to the stares. I focused on Titan, making sure he was comfortable, hydrated, and ready. When our number was called, I led him into the show ring, feeling the hard-packed dirt shift beneath my boots, the weight of hundreds of eyes on us. Titan stood tall beside me, muscles rippling under his shining coat, head held high. The judges circled slowly, inspecting every angle, whispering to each other, occasionally nodding. Titan did not so much as twitch. He was born for this. When the announcer called out the winners and Titan's name boomed over the loudspeaker, the crowd erupted into applause. I grinned so wide my cheeks hurt. Titan tossed his head and let out a low, deep bellow that seemed to shake the very air, a victorious sound that made my heart soar. I led him forward to accept the grand champion ribbon, and the judge shook my hand firmly, clapping me on the back. "Fine animal you have there, son," he said with a wink. The fair officials asked if they could take a few photos for the paper, and I agreed. Titan posed like the seasoned champion, he was, his ribbon gleaming against his dark hide. As the photographer snapped pictures, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning around, I saw a reporter from one of the local stations, one who had covered the whole mess with Karen. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" he said, notebook in hand. I shrugged. "Sure, why not?" The reporter asked the usual things about Titan's recovery, about how it felt to win after everything that happened. I answered honestly but kept it simple. "Hard work, patience, and a lot of heart," I said. "That is what gets you through the hard times." After the reporter left, I spent the rest of the day wandering the fairgrounds, catching up with neighbors and friends. Kids ran up to pet Titan, and he endured it all with the patience of a saint, occasionally snorting softly or nudging a hand when he wanted more scratches. Parents thanked me for standing up to Karen, for making the community safer, for reminding everyone what real responsibility looked like. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I led Titan back toward the trailer. The fair was winding down, the crowds thinning out, the air cooling rapidly. I paused for a moment just outside the ring, letting Titan graze for a bit while I looked out over the field. It had been a long, hard road getting here. There had been moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of it all felt like too much to bear. But every time I had looked into Titan's eyes, I had found a reason to keep fighting. Not just for me or for the ranch, but for the principle that right was right and wrong was wrong, no matter how loud or powerful the wrongdoers thought they were. Karen was gone now, a sour memory fading fast. Her house had sold to a young family with 2 kids and a golden retriever, the kind of folks who waved when they drove by and respected the fences and property lines. The HOA had new leadership, folks who cared more about community than about control. The neighborhood was healing, just like Titan and just like me. Back at the ranch, Titan settled into his pasture like he had never left. The grass was thick and green, the barns freshly painted, the fences strong and straight. The place hummed with life and hope and a sense of peace I had not felt in years. Every evening I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling the deep, steady contentment that comes from knowing you stood your ground and came through the fire stronger than before. One evening, as I sat there, Titan wandered over to the fence nearest the porch and let out a soft snort. I smiled, set my cup down, and walked over, reaching through the rails to scratch his favorite spot behind his ears. He leaned into my hand, eyes half closed in pleasure. "We did it, buddy," I said quietly. "We came through. We are still standing." Titan snorted again, as if agreeing, then lowered his head to graze, content and unbothered by the world. The stars came out one by one, dusting the sky with silver. A gentle breeze stirred the trees, and somewhere off in the distance a coyote called to the night. I leaned back against the fence and breathed deep, letting the peace of the land fill me. This was home. This was life. And no one was ever going to take it from us again.